All right. So I just finished season 5 of The Sopranos. That means I technically have like one season left, though apparently split up into two parts. I'll probably do two additional videos for that. Either way, let's actually just get into season 5. No dilly dallying. All right, first without spoilers. This was probably one of the better seasons, just overall, like flat out. Better than season 2, season 3, especially better than season 4. Season 4, if you remember, my feelings about that one was that it was just, I don't think I described it this way, but it felt more like a family drama than a real crime drama, especially with the climax. And a lot of season 5 kind of felt a little bit like that too. However, since there was an actual climax where everything was building to something, um, it had that, it managed to hammer home the crime element, right? And of course, there was always family drama throughout this entire series, so it's not like the family drama aspect was a shot against it at any point, right? The problem was that it was like only family drama in season 4. Season 5 is where it feels like season 4 and season 5 are kind of like one extended season where like a whole lot of the plot threads that got dropped in season 4 that were just left hanging, like the tensions between Johnny Sack and also some of the tensions surrounding Adriana, like all of that come to a head in season 5, especially in the climax, and that is real nice to see. Great, excellent. On top of all that, we also get to see introductions of new characters. So, while I'm thinking of it, because I don't actually have a note here, there was an introduction of a new character called Feach. He was very temporary, and I won't get into details. I just realized maybe I shouldn't mention him, but I guess as long as I'm vague about it, it doesn't really matter. Feach, along with a number of other gangsters, gets released from prison, and he immediately just wants to get back into the game. And as you can see, as you can see from the very beginning, he starts creating problems. And I think that the way they handled his plot line, it was very interesting. It was very like from a storytelling perspective, it wasn't like handled in like the most like exhilarating way, but it was handled in a way of this is kind of like a subplot. This is a way to show how Tony has grown over the series. So, just to have like this subplot in season 5, right from the beginning, I thought it was a great addition. So I just want to start by mentioning that. All right, but going off of that, another character who gets released is Tony B. Now, Tony B, he's called that to be distinguished from Tony Soprano, Tony S, Big Tony. And he apparently is apparently, emphasis on the word apparently, is the other cousin, because, Christopher is another cousin of Tony's. Or I guess, no, he's the nephew. He's the cousin of Tony Soprano. So quite literally, their family, they grew up together, and there's all these like offhanded lore dumps, which when I say offhanded, I actually mean that in like a good way, right? Like just through dialogue, they talk about like their backstory, how they grew up together, stuff like that. So this is like good type of lore dumping, right? But the one problem, and this is kind of a nitpick, it's not like a terrible thing, because like what can you do, right? there's only so much wiggle room. But either way, his introduction kind of just feels out of the blue. It's just like, oh yeah, by the way, here's Tony's cousin. Here he is, right here. and and if you didn't know, he grew up with Tony, and they've known each other all along. And there's all this backstory here. And if you didn't know, it's just like, do I know you? Like, who are you? Um, and yeah, it was kind of funny, just to think about. Now, of course, over the course of the season, you get to know him, and I think they handled it as well as they could have. So it's not really like a serious complaint, um, but even still, like, yeah, like on one hand, they could have changed the character, made him less relevant to Tony's backstory. In fact, like, maybe I need to look into it more. Maybe Tony B was hinted at earlier in the series and I just missed it. That's entirely possible. In fact, I might have to eat my own words here. Because if that's true, like, I'm not doing like a whole lot of research on this. So I want to avoid spoilers. Other than reading the summaries on Wikipedia, I'm not doing a whole lot of research on this. So yeah, I felt like this introduction came out of the blue, and the fact that there's all this detailed backstory was yeah, it just came out of nowhere. But either way, they could have changed that and made him like a character that was less relevant to Tony. But then again, we wouldn't have gotten the storyline we did. So, meh. Right. Another thing I want to talk about, moving on to another thing, as I've started to notice a pattern with Chris and Polly. Like, they're always at each other's necks, right? Right? They're always getting into shit, or the best way to put it is this: they're always fighting, right? And they're about to like essentially draw blood, right? And then they get into deep shit together, and that forces them to bond, and then they squash the beef, right? And it's always like darkly funny in a way, and this happens every season. It's like this pattern. It's like, and it's just like that's their relationship. It's great, and like my prediction is in season 6, like something's going down, um, but we'll see. All right, so another thing I wanted to mention was, like, this is just something offhanded. Um, there was this dream sequence, another dream sequence. I won't say anything specific about it since we're not in the spoiler section yet. But man, I just do not like dream sequences unless they're really well handled. And this one was endless. Like, when I looked up the episode summary, apparently it was like 20 minutes long. It felt like 40 minutes. I thought it was like the entire episode that was like this dream sequence. And I was like, you've got to be joking. I literally just kept looking at the progress bar. I was like, when is this episode gonna end? That's a minor complaint though. At least these dream sequences don't happen too often. All right, another thing I want to comment on is the relationship between Christopher and Adriana. So, something that I thought was interesting and also just worth commenting on is that this show is not afraid to show just how abusive Christopher is of Adriana, right? I feel like modern shows, they would be much more dumbed down. They would be much more toned down, and they'd be much more inclined to paper over the nastiness of the relationship, right? They wouldn't want to show Christopher and just how cruel he is of towards Adriana, right? And also, I also wanted to, like, just to complete that point before I move on. it shows just how like writing has changed. I feel like there's been such a decline in writing as of late, where people are just not willing to show characters for who they are. Today we just got like Marvels and superhero stuff. It's just like, no, like these are gangsters and they act like gangsters. What do you expect from a gangster? Like these people, they do drugs, they cheat, they literally beat the shit out of their wives in some cases. Not all of them. You know, yeah, I don't think Tony has ever beaten the shit out of Carmela. Has he? No, I don't think he has. Um, that's interesting. That's another thing, another interesting to comment on. But yeah, and they're not afraid to just show it, depict it, and there's no ham-fisted judgment either. They just show it. And I think I mentioned this in the first review I did when I was talking about Tony, right? Like there's no ham-fisted judgment. There's no like finger wagging, like no. They just put it out there, and you just see it, and shit happens. Yeah, and then also, as you know, Adriana is currently an FBI informant, and and the FBI, through that, they know that she's being abused by Christopher, right? And they try to help. But at the same time, it's kind of backhanded, right? Because these people, like, we see scenes of the FBI, they're kind of like snarking about her behind her back, right? Making fun of her. They also make fun of her for a particular thing that happens in this season. They engage in a bit of gossip, right? So like they're not necessarily the most sympathetic people, right? And I want to go into more depth about this cycle that keeps going on, but we'll save that for the spoiler section. Either way, what I'm really just commenting on is how the complexities are always present. And finally, this isn't necessarily a truly substantive point, just something I wanted to comment on before things got juicy. It's just, I remember being kind of annoyed that the Adriana plotline wasn't completed in season 4. But the way things kind of unfold in season 5, it's just like the catastrophe kind of just builds. Now, that doesn't mean they couldn't have compressed this into, to say, one season, these 2 seasons into one, But the way they ended up handling it made it much more satisfying. All right. So that covers much of what I wanted to handle in the non-spoiler section. So as I said, I'm very satisfied with this season. I guess the ultimate question is it better than season 1? And honestly, it gives it a run for its money. Yeah. I think it very well could be. I honestly haven't thought about it. Yeah, I don't know. It at the very least, it's neck and neck with season 1, which surprises me because season 1 has been the best one so far. And season 2 and 4 fell short. Season 3 was pretty good. It wasn't as good. And season 5, right up there. So very satisfied with what we got here. All right, so moving on to spoilers. Spoilers. All right. At the end of season 4, we saw, of course, Tony and Carmela, they split up. And basically at the beginning of the season then, we see Tony go through, I guess, a fair amount of bad behavior, right? He tries to pick up, was it Jennifer Melfi? I know Melfi's her last name. I just forget her first name. his doctor, Dr. Melfi, and he reacts badly to her rejection. But what I thought was the most interesting about these interactions was Melfi's behavior, right? Because you kind of got like two sides of her, right? And so on one hand, so actually there's like two sides of her. There's like two Melfis in one sense, and there's two interpretations. So let's start with the first interpretation of these two Melfis, right? So on one hand, there was Melfi responding to Tony's advances, right? Where she basically gives her formal rejection, like, "Hey, we can't do this. I was your doctor. It violates my principles, etc., etc., etc." And and then, so that's one side of her, right? The principled side of her. And then we see another side of her, which is her talking to her psychologist. And that side of her presents a more vulnerable side, where she talks about how he's very persistent and how she needs to let him down softly because, implying that he's very volatile and he might hurt her when she rejects him, or if she rejects him too aggressively. So, those are the two Melfis, the principled Melfi and the scared Melfi. And that's one interpretation. Now, the other interpretation, which seems to be the more correct one, which she is hiding from her psychologist, which is actually kind of revealed by, like, I guess you say, it's like a wet dream, where she's like sleeping with Tony. Tony is how do you want to put this? Well, a bad boy, but she knows he's a bad boy, right? So, like, basically, her motivations all this time haven't necessarily been principled, right? So her rejection of him, eventually she spills another reason for why she rejects him. It's like, if we get into a relationship, I'm going to have to start explaining, I'm going to have to start taking moral stances on the things that you do, and then she starts saying that you don't respect women, you don't respect people in general, and blah, blah, blah. And, like, he reacts really badly to this. And I remember watching this and writing in this note here, like, where does the Melfi plot go from here, right? Like, is there a clean way to go back to how it was? And eventually, she just takes him back as a patient. And even during their confrontation, she's like, I don't want to tell you these things because I don't want to contaminate our relationship, so I can take you back as a patient, right? And, like, she's trying desperately to hold on to this, like, distant, but, like, this distant connection. That's probably a good way of putting it, right? She has this connection, but it's at a distance, right? Like, she knows he's like a bad boy, but she's able to maintain her moral stance, her principled nature, by keeping him at a distance. And now I think about it, I don't know if she told her psychologist that she took him back after his sexual advances. So it'll be interesting to see, like, if she hasn't, if she's keeping it a secret, it'll be interesting to see if they cover it in season 6. They very well could, because they're really good at following up on things, even much later on. So, but either way, what this shows is that, although I talked about in the past about how Melfi is primarily driven by principle, I think as things have developed, I think there is more to it, right? She is very principled, but it is bound up with this sexual tension, and she wants a connection, but she's keeping him at a distance, right? And there was also that scene where, I think this was still back in season 3, that I think I forgot to mention, where she was going to send him off to another specialist, right? But she decides to, like, no, I want you to stay. Right? She wants him, in a way. All right. So moving on to the next thing. Oh yes, this is a really interesting development. And it's a interesting way of continuing this, because a lot of the season has to do with Tony confronting his horn dog behavior, right? His reputation, and yes, his behavior in and of itself. So first with Jennifer Melfi, it's the behavior itself. We'll also talk about the divorce, maybe. But it also forces him to confront his reputation, because there's a scene where, well, first, an initial scene where he almost kisses Adriana. Yeah, so they almost connect when Christopher is away. But circumstances ensure that they're apart, which is nice. However, they eventually decide to go get drugs. Tony's like driving her because her car broke down, something like that. And they get into a car crash together. So basically, some rumor starts to spread about Adriana and Tony being in some sort of affair with one another. And it looks pretty bad, right? And a very specific rumor, like kind of like telephone, spreads amongst people about how she was giving him a car head or something like that, sucking his dick while he's driving. And of course, we see Christopher react really badly. He beats the shit out of Adriana and kicks her out of the house. And, well, what's significant about this, I mean, aside from the fact that Christopher is very abusive, is that Tony's reputation precedes him, right? There was no actual affair, but he has such a reputation for being such a schmooze, a horn dog, that he can't escape this. Like, literally, just no one trusts him. And even his wife, ex, they're not divorced at this point, but yeah, even Carmela does not trust him, right? She's just like, are you serious right now? Like, literally everyone knows. And why should I trust you? And it's like, yeah, like, what can you possibly say in response to that? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. So this kind of was a shock moment to Tony, where he basically realizes that, like, holy shit, they call it like a midlife crisis thing. And it kind of is, yeah. So he kind of needs to deal with it. And also, we see Carmela. She also has her first relationship with someone else, aside from Tony, in this season, right? And what was interesting, there's like an offhanded comment where Tony says she's never slept with a man other than myself, right? And that's actually not true. She slept with a counselor in this season. And we don't know if there's someone else beyond that, but does he find out? Does he find out in season 6? We'll see. But either way, the point here is that she has her first relationship, right? She's able to finally, since she's divorcing Tony, separated and divorcing him, she's able to finally, I was going to say have an affair, but what do you want to call it? Have an affair if she's separated. She is a very traditional Catholic, so like when she talks to her Catholic priest, he does say that it's an affair. So divorce is not allowed, etc., etc. But however you want to interpret it. And I thought the way that they handled the relationship was actually really well done, especially the way it concluded, because the way it resolved. Because the whole time you're thinking like, what happens when Tony finds out, right? And as I already implied, I mean, I'm assuming you've already seen it. Tony does not find out in the season. He never learns, but it does. Their relationship does fall apart. And it falls apart because Carmela is essentially, as he implies, using her. She has him do a favor for her, right? And since he's the counselor for AJ, she has him do a favor, help him, help AJ in a way, and then does sexual favors and as a reward, right? And he thinks about it and realizes, and when he finally confronts her about it, she vehemently rejects this and is insulted by the suggestion. How dare you suggest that I'm using you like that? And literally, my first thought is that it's the comparison to Tony and Artie, right? Remember when Artie got a loan from Tony for 50 grand? I think this was in season 4. And of course it falls through. And Tony, now he's in debt to Tony. So in order to pay it off, Tony basically was like, oh yeah, I get free stuff from your restaurant for the rest of my life. He works his magic, and Artie kind of does this realization that you used me. You knew this would fall through and that you could take advantage of this to get yourself some benefits from me, right? And Tony's like, no, that's ridiculous. How could you suggest such a thing? I wouldn't use you like that. And Artie is like, no, this is unconscious. This is unconscious behavior. You're not aware of it, but you still do it. And that's what I was thinking, is that while the counselor never accuses Carmela of doing it unconsciously, maybe she is, just like Tony does it unconsciously, perhaps. Is it unconscious? Mayhaps. All right. The next thing I want to talk about is a bit of a change, but this is actually a small thing, but it's a seed being planted. I hope it'll be followed up on in season 6. And if it is, it'll be catastrophic for Meadow and Tony, their family. At one point in the season, Meadow's boyfriend, I don't even remember his name, who cares? He sees one of the mobsters, his name's Vito, giving fellatio to some guard. So in other words, the guy's gay, right? And the circumstances in which he sees this is he gets a job at a work site, right? Where Tony basically pulls some strings and gets the job for Meadow's boyfriend. That's essentially how it works, right? And this is where these gangsters, they do their sit-in work. They just sit around and do nothing and get paid for it. And it leads to this circumstance, and it kind of hypes it up with Vito confronting Meadow's boyfriend, and but instead of it's kind of like threatening that he instead gets 2 tickets to see like a baseball game, right? And he's like, "You're going to see this baseball game with me," right? Like subtly threatening, you know, like come on, like we're gonna talk, you know. It's like, what are you gonna do? And the boyfriend's just like, yeah, I'm terrified of this guy. I don't want to fucking go. Even like pulls out his bag and starts packing it, like on the verge of like fleeing because he's like terrified for his life. And of course, Meadow interprets this as him like trying to run out in the relationship, and that leads to a whole bunch of stuff. But aside from all that, they decide to get engaged, or he decides to propose to her because he wants to resolve all that. By the way, they never really follow up on this afterwards because the boyfriend he stops going to the job site as a result. Like he just like I'm not going back there, right? And I mean who would? And there's no risk. And there's no reason to take that risk. So yeah, from there then we can only guess to see what the future has in store. Will Vito take further steps against Meadow's boyfriend? And if he does, what will Meadow do? What will Tony do? Will Meadow be aware of what happened to her boyfriend or now fiance? Is he going to actually right? I think the big question here, actually, let's put it this way. The big question is Meadow has been staunchly supportive of and defensive of her family. And this is in spite of how detached she is from them, right? Like she's like a liberal minded, bleeding heart, you know, going to university, very smart, and even like Meadow's boyfriend's like horrified to see these gangsters behave the way they do. You know, she's been completely siloed off from them. She just does not understand what the gangster life is like, you know. And she doesn't understand that her previous boyfriend, um, Jackie is his name, right? Literally got shot, actually by Vito. It was Vito that killed him. So, yeah, so, man, what if Vito kills both of her boyfriends? We'll see. All right, so, time to move on to the 2 major climaxes in this season. And these were both, I guess you could say, a long time coming, or at least one of them was. The other one was yes and a no, long time coming. But either way, it doesn't matter whether it's a long time coming or not. First, the Adriana catastrophe. Man, that just kept growing and growing and growing and growing. Right? She just kept being riddled with guilt, coasting along, thinking she could do nothing, get away with it, and then finally it all comes to a head when some idiot stabs a guy to death in her back room, and she walks in on it, and then they cover it up, and then she gets caught moving around some of the bloody rags that they used to cover up the murder site after the fact, right? The FBI gets onto that, and they bring her in, and the way it's written is very clever because technically the FBI they never there's like a point where the FBI they literally say, "Do you honestly think we aren't aware of what you tried to throw away in that dumpster?" You know, implying that stuff. And then she immediately just confesses everything, right? So you never really know if uh, if the FBI actually knew what was there, or if Adriana was just stupid and just admitted everything. Either way, once she admitted to everything, she was complicit for obstructing a murder and could get, like, was it like 25 to life or something like that? Or at least 25 years. And the only way to get out of it was to wear a wire, which she refused to do. And another thing was potentially dragging Christopher into it. And finally, at the end of all of this, she asked for a lawyer. And I think this was like the most stunning development, right? Because it kind of makes you stop and ask yourself, like, bitch, why the fuck did you not ask for a lawyer in the beginning? Like, maybe, there's some, like, legal reasons I'm not aware of that you don't want to do that. Like, maybe the mob would be tipped off by that fact, by getting a lawyer, but I don't know why. Um, yeah, so, like, yeah, why didn't you get a lawyer from the beginning? Why were you just talking to them? Um, yeah, the fact that it took her this long to get a lawyer was just absurd. And they were just milking her this entire time, and then finally she convinces them that I think I might be able to flip Christopher, because Christopher was just chafing because of Tony B and Tony Soprano. And confusing, right? But their relationship and their connection, and that's where it all comes to a head, right? That's where it all comes to a head. She finally admits that Danielle was an FBI informant, that she's been or an FBI agent herself, and that she has been an FBI informant for like over a year now. And man, that scene, like watching the Christopher's face as she admits it, was just so intense. Like, so well acted, so brutal. Yeah, and then, and true to Christopher's form, he nearly kills her in response, nearly chokes her to death, and she maintains her connection. And here's the thing, Christopher almost goes along with it. He almost agrees to go along with it, run away into, like, I guess, witness protection to put away Tony. But he sees a family, and it kind of and their I guess their simple lifestyle, right? And their children. And it's all very crude, and he kind of projects that onto his future, and he panics. And the next thing you know, Adriana gets a call. She learns from Tony that Christopher has attempted suicide, that Silvio is on his way over to take her to the hospital. And the way the scene progressed, like, actually, I fell for it. I did. I fell for it. But as soon as they pulled into that wooded area, I recognized the scene. I remember many years ago, I watched this Watch Mojo video. I don't even know if Watch Mojo still exists, but it used to make this, like, slop content, like top 10 lists. of like TV shows and movies and stuff like that. And sometimes there'd be like stuff I didn't see, but like 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 top 10 deaths in like this TV show or something like that. And I remember there's distinctly a scene where a woman gets dragged out of a car, sobbing, and then she starts crawling away, begging for mercy, and then someone walks up behind her, and shoots her in the head. I mean, technically it's off screen, but obviously it would be in the head. And yeah, I never, all this time I knew it was so long ago that I could not recognize who it would be, right? So I had no way of connecting it to Adriana. But as soon as they pulled into that wooded area, it's like, oh my god, she's done. Yeah. And then then he learned that the whole thing was a lie, that Christopher never attempted suicide, that he instead just told Tony. And Adriana's dead now. And when I watched that, I went back and I watched it a second time. So I'm that kind of person. And it makes you stop and wonder. Because I remember the FBI talking about it in the aftermath, right? And like the woman who was talking to Adriana, of course, was in denial that Aid was dead. And all the other ones were just like, she's dead. You know, like, they didn't say that. That's not the actual dialogue, but like, it's just the looks on their faces. Like, she's like, no, she could be, like, off in Florida by now, or I can't remember what state she said. You know, and they just give her a look, you know. Like, no, she's floating by the docks. Body found floating by the docks, you know. And yeah, it just makes you wonder, you know, like, what is the point of this, right? What is the point of grabbing these people up, putting them under witness, making them FBI informants, and creating this seemingly endless death cycle where they get caught, they get shot, and die, right? Like, what are the FBI accomplishing? Now, as I say that, I guess that is kind of countered by the other plot line, to be fair. But there is that to think on. You know, how many people need to die before you stop and ask yourself, what are we accomplishing? And yeah, obviously that doesn't really change the fact that it's actually the mob that's doing the killing, but still. um, what are you accomplishing? Ask yourself that. All right, so then we have the final plot line that we want to talk about. I guess it's kind of two, but they're all like, it's kind of intertwined. That is the plot line involving Tony B. How it just creates all these complications, especially given the familial relationship. Tony has this deep connection to Tony B in particular, his cousin. And people can see that, right? They can see the bias, and they feel like they're threatened. And everything comes to a head when Tony B acts out and starts killing. He kills, assassinates two people in the New York mob. And when he does that, this creates a serious problem on the part of their relationship, because well, basically they want Tony B's head, right? And Tony Soprano doesn't want to give him up, right? Because he's his cousin, right? And it basically everybody can see that struggle, and they want to know if he's tough enough to actually make that decision, right? Can he actually do it? And basically it comes down to a question of, is he able to give up the location of Tony B and give him over to a man who's essentially going to torture and then later kill Tony B. And the decision Tony Soprano ends up making is he ends up going and killing Tony B himself by his own hand. He shoots him in the head with a shotgun. And basically everybody gains respect for Tony again once he does this. It doesn't really do much to diffuse the tensions, at least in the beginning, right? Like, they're still very angry, like we wanted to torture him, we wanted to kill him. It's like, dude, guys, stop being so bloodthirsty, right? I killed the guy. He's dead. So you got your man. Stop crying, you know? And that was essentially the climax, right? It was Tony forced to murder his own cousin, the one that he had long connections to, in order to dissolve the conflict between the two crime families. And I thought and this happened in the very last episode, I think. So, I thought they did a good job setting up a lot of connections between the two characters. So, put credit where it's due. They did a good job setting it up and following through. Even though I thought that Tony B kind of came out of the blue in the beginning, it's not like he felt like an empty character by the end. Certainly not. However, everything is undercut at the end. Not undercut as in, like, for storytelling reasons, this is, like, bad. No, I mean undercut in, like, a cynical, like, this is, like, a deliberate storytelling choice. Undercut in the sense that Johnny Sack, again, Johnny Sack, for context, is part of the New York crew. He was the one demanding Tony B's head. He all of a sudden gets arrested by the FBI at the very end of the episode and the season. Just out of the blue, because one of his men was an FBI informant. So as I mentioned before, that kind of contradicts what I was saying about the death cycle with Adriana. But what matters, though, is that Tony kind of realizes that he almost killed Tony B for no reason. If he had just waited a little bit longer, Johnny Sack would have been arrested, and he wouldn't have had to kill his cousin. But then again, I think part of the problem was losing the respect of his men. His men were losing respect for him, and the mere fact that he was willing to kill his own cousin in order to deal with this problem won their respect. And I think that was important. So no matter how he concludes it, I think this was actually, no matter how cold-blooded it is, this was important for him consolidating his control over the mob and winning over respect of his men. So I guess that's how it is. Mob is nasty. And that is the final thing. So we have gotten to the end. So I guess we don't need any outro. I think that is it.
I have now released both volumes of The Paths We Have Taken, which is the first arc in the Broken Reality. This is my grim, dark, epic horror fantasy series. It takes the political intrigue of A Song of Ice and Fire, the abrasive characterization of Abercrombie, the long-term storytelling of One Piece, and the philosophical horror of the Second Apocalypse to explore the human capacity for cruelty. Check it out if you are interested.